Is it possible that an advanced civilization existed on Earth over 10,000 years ago? After all this time, would the remains of these people and their homeland still be recognizable as the seat of power it once was? Could it be that as a species, humanity has forgotten its past? Or as Graham Hancock so eloquently put it, are we a species with amnesia? According to the traditional theory of human evolution, this is impossible. The progression of man's transition is said to be this: bands of nomads that wandered the land and followed wild herds of animals, to farmers, merchants, and townsfolk, to city-dwelling, industrial-type society, finally to the global society of today. To those who accept this theory of evolution and progression at face value, humans today are at the peak of their technological and scientific understanding. Society has slowly but surely continued its upward trend from the cave-dwelling Neanderthal of the past to the iPhone-using Homo sapiens of today. While the traditional linear view of societal evolution is widely held, there is a growing number of scientists and people at large that are seeing more and more evidence emerge for a different human history. A history that has been forgotten. A history that has left clues through myth and legend so that one day, people would remember the accomplishments and heights of the power of their ancestors. What history could this be? What type of legend could survive over 10,000 years and still be accurate? If there was a myth that could hold the secrets of humanity's past in its words, what would it describe? The fabled city of Atlantis. It is scoffed at by some and pursued with a zealous fervor by others. Atlantis has been a topic of debate among scholars and historians for centuries. A mighty empire, technologically advanced in science and engineering, wealthy beyond measure, and a military superpower. Could they have existed in the past? Is it possible that such a civilization could be forgotten? Did the winds of time distort our perception of human history? The evidence indicates that this is indeed what has happened. If this is true, how could a culture so significant be forgotten? Plato stated in the Critias, "The names of these first inhabitants have been preserved, but their deeds have perished on account of the catastrophes that befell those who succeeded them and the long passage of time intervening." Those of their race who survived these successive destructions were, as I said before, left as an illiterate mountain people who had only heard the tradition of the names of the rulers of their country, and beyond these only little of their deeds. Now, they were pleased to give their descendants the names of these rulers, even though they were unaware of their ancestors' virtues and institutions, except for some dim legends concerning each of them. Then, for many generations, these survivors and their children lived in distress for their survival and gave thought to their needs. They spoke only of supplying these needs and had no interest in the events of the distant past. It makes clear that due to the immediate needs of survival, the loss of culture and knowledge, and the passage of time, the people forgot their past. The only way this history lived on was through myth and legend and in the names of their descendants. But if the story of Atlantis is true, there must be a geographical location that held this once great city. Where could this city be? Its location has been a source of controversy for years. It has been suggested that the Antarctic is the resting place of Atlantis, and we made this assumption in many of our videos. There are also speculation that Atlantis rests at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, between Europe and the Americas. The Bermuda Triangle, the Caribbean, and others have been touted as the original location of Atlantis, but to no avail. No consensus has ever been reached on where Atlantis once existed. The Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, is a site that could very well be the location of the lost city of Atlantis. Relatively unknown to the world until the 1980s, the Richat structure is a remote geological formation located in Mauritania, Africa, in the middle of the desert. Apart from its amazing physical features and breathtaking beauty, when compared to Plato's description of the city of Atlantis, it is the best candidate for the original location of Atlantis. To fully understand how amazing this discovery is, it is necessary to decipher what Atlantis is, what the Richat structure is, and who Plato was. By comparing the Richat structure to the descriptions of Atlantis provided by Plato, you can begin to connect the dots and see the Richat structure as what it may truly be, the foundation upon which Atlantis was built. But what exactly was Atlantis? Before we continue, we want to give a shout out to numerologist.com. This incredible website can give you a completely free numerology video report based on your name and date of birth. I tried the numerology report myself, and I was really amazed at how accurate it was. You can discover your life path, secret talents, and hidden strengths, and many powerful insights into your character. Over 2 million people have tried the numerology report, and all of them are amazed at how accurate it is. You can try it yourself. It's completely free. All you have to do is click the link in my description and type your first name and your date of birth. Then you'll immediately see your personalized video numerology report. Let me know in the comments if your report was accurate. The city of Atlantis is the seat of power that was once held by the Atlantean people over 10,000 years ago. It was told that the Atlanteans lived on a mighty island with very distinct geographical features and where they enjoyed lives of great sophistication and abundance. This legendary city was sunk by the wrath of the gods for their impunity, losing all of its secrets to the sea. They were an extremely powerful military civilization that was said to have a vast navy and a strong merchant class. The rulers of Atlantis were described as loving, kind, and good to their people. These facts led to a thriving society that was advanced in its science, politics, and engineering. There are even claims that the Atlantean civilization was even more advanced than we are today, that they knew the secrets of anti-gravity and also had contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. In fact, there are claims that Atlantis itself is an extraterrestrial colony on Earth. There is no way to determine the veracity of these claims, and there would be no point in breaking down these arguments. However, traditional history looks at the myth and existence of Atlantis as a story that was invented out of whole cloth by the only modern source that is available, the works of Plato. Historians say that if it wasn't a fiction of his imagination, it was a mash of ideas and representations of contemporary and historical civilizations during his time. The one thing that it could not be is a real accounting of events. Often, the very mention of Atlantis can have eyes rolling and any serious discussion be thrown out the window. It can be considered pseudo-history or worse. But why is this? Is there evidence that contributes to the theory that Atlantis existed, was a real and powerful nation, and was indeed swept into the sea, erasing its legacy from the human psyche? What evidence do those with traditional views on history have that Atlantis didn't exist? To dissect this topic properly, it helps to understand the source of these myths. Plato. Who was Plato? Why do we remember him? What did he contribute to society? Was he known to fabricate wild narratives, complete with geographical, societal, and historical details to make his points? Or is there evidence to suggest that he had delivered, to the best of his ability, a history that was related to him so that others could remember these events in the future? Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher that lived almost 2,500 years ago. His philosophical works are regarded as some of the most influential ever written. He was a student of Socrates, the teacher of Aristotle, and was admired in his time. He has remained a powerful figure in literature and history because of his many contributions to the public dialogue around truth, justice, and many other philosophical ideas. He is also well known because of the books he wrote during his life. Two of these books are the dialogues, the Richat and the Timaeus. This is where our modern understanding of Atlantis is formed. Throughout the dialogues of the Richat and the Timaeus, Plato describes the empire and city of Atlantis, the Atlantean people, and their society. He goes into great detail, describing the geography of the city of Atlantis, its structure, its history, and the terrible destruction of the city itself. This history was relayed to Plato through the detailed notes that were passed down for 6 generations from his relative Solon. Solon was an Athenian statesman and lawmaker who was known for his work in justice and corruption reform. He was known as a man of strong character and morals. Solon had received all of the information he had about the Atlanteans on his journey to Egypt, where he visited a temple of Neith and had the Egyptian priest Sais translate the story from the hieroglyphs in the temple. Solon took these notes and translations back to Athens, where they were kept in his family until Plato eventually published what he learnt in those notes in the dialogues the Timaeus and the Critias. The Timaeus and the Critias are lengthy works, and the entire description of Atlantis and its society are very detailed. What Plato learned of Atlantis from Solon's translated notes was that Atlantis was a seafaring society, with a capital city built in the form of concentric rings of water and land, 2 of land and 3 of water. The city itself was very large, over 20 kilometers in width, and had mountains to the north. Atlantis also had a freshwater spring in the center of the island. The city of Atlantis was ruled by a king named Atlas. Plato learned that this mighty city was eventually swallowed into the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Its destruction happened 9,000 years before Solon's visit, which was approximately 2,600 years ago, placing the destruction of Atlantis approximately 11,600 years in the past. There were many other details that Plato shared in his dialogues, including the types of animals on the islands, the surrounding landscape, and much more. Could all of these details be made up? The imagination of a wild old man run amok? Was he sharing a story from a distant relative whose imagination had run away from him? The answers to these questions are important because the entire Atlantis legend is based on these recollections. Traditional historians would say exactly that. The claims made of Atlantis are baseless, wild, and untenable with history as we know it. This statement runs contrary to the reputations of both of these men. Solon and Plato were known to be men of honor, propriety, and honesty. Are we to believe that in this one area, on this one topic, that these men were not? Perhaps, instead of the problem lying in the source, it is in the history itself. History as we know it. That is what the historians would say. The story of Atlantis does not fit the current perception of the past. Does this mean that it could not be true? The accounts of Solon, as translated to him by the Egyptian priest, could not have possibly happened? Or rather, is it possible that our perceptions of the past are faulty? Is the history, as we know it, not actually as it was? The fact that the destruction of Atlantis is said to have happened almost 12,000 years ago presents the possibility that if Atlantis did exist and was destroyed violently, the knowledge of this could be lost to the sands of time. The arguments against Atlantis are mostly based on the idea that if there was truly an empire of such magnitude, we would have known of its existence. There would be clues left behind. The consensus is that if the stories of old are not verifiable in some way, then they must be myths, and myths are simply stories that were made up to explain things people didn't understand, or to explain concepts through narrative. This seems like sound reasoning, but is it a fact that myths never turn out to be true? Are there examples of myths considered nothing but fables that through the discovery of archaeological evidence turned out to be actual history? It turns out there are examples of history that had been labeled as myth. Almost everyone has heard of Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They tell the story of the Trojan War, which is where the famous Trojan horse was used by the Greeks to eventually take Troy and defeat the Trojans. It was well known and commonly accepted that this story was simply a myth. that no such war ever took place and that the city, although rumored to be true, didn't exist. However, in 1822, a businessman in Turkey was able to locate the city and begin archaeological digs. The layout of the city and the physical damage on its walls suggest that not only were the stories of the city of Troy true, but also that the famous Trojan War may have actually taken place. Even more amazing was the fact that Homer's poems were passed down orally for centuries before ever being recorded in writing. A myth, its narrative passed down orally for centuries, was labeled as a fabrication until proof of its existence came to light. Another myth is the tale of Rora-Menu, which is told by Solomon Islanders. This story speaks of a man who, after his wife decides to elope with another man on an island named Tianimanu, decides to place a curse on the island. He brings the curse to the island in a canoe that is adorned with 4 wave murals. When on the island, he planted 2 taro plants, while he kept one for himself, which he planted on a different island. As his plant began to sprout, it would cause a disaster on the island of Tianimanu. As he watched from the mountaintop on his island, his plant sprouted and waves came crashing into the island, causing it to sink beneath the sea. This legend, once thought to be fiction, was indeed based on fact. The island of Tianimanu was sunk into the ocean, not from a series of waves that were sent in anger, but from an undersea tremor. This caused the underwater slope it was sitting on to collapse and sent the entire island to disappear beneath the waves. The myth said that the waves caused the sinking of the island when in fact they were the result of the massive water displacement caused by the sinking of Tianimanu. Lying underwater is the remains of what once was an island. The oral history of that event is given special meaning by the narrative that is attached to the recollection of the events. Oftentimes, people will dismiss a myth because of the otherworldly elements of the story. Did this man sink the island with a curse born out of jealousy? No. Was there an island that sunk below the surface of the ocean? Yes. The historical and momentous event is passed down from generation to generation to ensure no one forgets, even if some of the details get muffled along the way. Could it be possible that another island saw its destruction by being sunk into the sea? That another island could have met a similar fate, and that its history and its accomplishments be translated into a story to be passed down for generations? Orichalcum is not a place, but a mythical material that was rumored to have existed in the past. It had many amazing qualities that made it extremely valuable and sought after. It was said to be malleable, non-oxidizing, and durable. It was also rumored to have a gold-like shine that was beautiful, so beautiful that the god Aphrodite had earrings fashioned from it. According to the historical record, no such material has ever existed. This changed in 2015 when a shipwreck was discovered in the Mediterranean carrying ingots and jewelry made of mysterious materials. This material had all of the qualities of orichalcum. It turns out that this material did exist. Orichalcum's physical properties determine it to be a high-quality brass. Malleable, non-oxidizing, and durable, this material would be very popular and precious at the time it was reported to exist. Another myth based on imaginary tales turns out to be true. As you can see, historical events and factual information can be misconstrued as myth and legend quite easily. The passage of long stretches of time and the nature of human civilization make it easy to forget important parts of the past. Critical and foundational elements of our past are lost to the sands of time, waiting for humanity to remember them. Many monuments, artifacts, and ruins still have no solid explanation for their existence. For centuries, humans forgot how to make concrete. The development of indoor plumbing, central heating, calculus, astronomical calculations, and much more have all been lost to time, only to be rediscovered years later. In fact, the Roman Empire used a concrete formula that made their concrete far stronger than any of our modern-day concrete. The Roman formula was lost, and no one can replicate it. Legends of materials such as flexible glass and others are thought to be myths, but if humanity could forget about so much of its history in only the last 2,500 years, imagine what else it could forget. Think about the potential for memory loss after 12,000 years. Is it possible that there are stories with no archaeological evidence to corroborate them as of yet that are connected to the real events of the past? There is an important reason to go over these seemingly unrelated events in history. They lay the groundwork for the case that Atlantis existed, that the descriptions that were passed down from the Egyptians to Solon, then to Plato, and eventually to the rest of the world are accurate. And the resting place of this ancient city is the Richat structure in Mauritania. These are the facts we know so far. Myths that were thought to be nothing more than fables can be based on historical events. Actual events can be passed down orally for centuries and still be a fairly accurate representation of events that transpired. Large-scale natural disasters can wipe out traces of human existence easily. Humans are good at developing sophisticated tools and science only to forget about them, leaving them to be rediscovered in the future. Credible men, Solon and Plato, known for their character, shared the details of the city of Atlantis. When you use this as your beginning point, the possibility that the city of Atlantis did exist seems very real. The questions become, do the details offered by Plato match the area of the Richat structure? Is there corroborating evidence that places Atlantis near the same area? Does anything in the historical timeline account for the destruction of an entire city in one night? And are there artifacts or ruins from that time that suggest something of a cataclysmic nature happened? The answers to these questions lead us ever closer to the answers about Atlantis and its location. Before deciphering if the Richat structure is the location of Atlantis, it is important to know where it can be found and what it is. The Richat structure is a geological formation in the desert of Mauritania in Africa. Though already known to the locals, it was officially discovered in the 1980s by astronauts on the Gemini 4 mission, who saw the amazing formation as they buzzed overhead. The structure is called the Eye of the Sahara because of its unique geological shape. It is a massive circular shape made up of concentric rings of hills and valleys in almost a perfect circle. From space and the aerial view, it truly does look like an eye. It is located almost 400 kilometers or 250 miles from the coast of West Africa and the ocean. Its structure and shape are so unusual that it has never been seen anywhere else in the world. Experts believe that they are the remnants of a volcanic-induced crater, not from an eruption but instead a scar left from subterranean pressure wreaking havoc on the Earth. It is widely considered by geologists to have formed through the upheaval of volcanic pressure over millions of years, causing a dome to be lifted, then collapsing. This process is said to have repeated itself many times to cause the concentric rings of circles that are there today. For those who know of Atlantis, the circular shape, combined with the elevated rings in a concentric pattern emanating from the center, makes it the most likely candidate for the original location of Atlantis. The best way to determine if the Richat structure was at one point the city of Atlantis is to compare the geography and the details of the area to the detailed descriptions given by Solon and Plato. What did Plato say about the geography of the land of Atlantis? There were alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling one another. There were 2 of land and 3 of water, which were turned as if with a lathe, each having its circumference equidistant every way from the center. When you compare the above quote to the physical characteristics of the Richat structure, there is a strong correlation. Not only is it a strong correlation, but it is also the only natural formation in the world that would properly match this description. It is difficult to tell from the ground the sheer size of the Richat structure. If you walked on the structure itself, it would be easy to mistake it for rocky hills and valleys. It is far bigger than you could notice from the ground. How big? If you measured the outside rings of the concentric circles, you would get a measurement of 23.5 kilometers or 15 miles across. A very large structure indeed. When Solon discussed the translations he received from the Egyptian priest, how did he describe the size of the city? The circular island of Atlantis has a diameter of 127 stadia. What are stadia? A common unit of measurement in the time of Plato, a stadia is equivalent to 607 feet. 127 stadia at 607 feet each equals 77,089 feet. Converted to kilometers, 127 stadia equal 23.4 kilometers or 15 miles. That means that the main island of Atlantis matches up almost exactly with the size of the Richat structure. The Richat structure is in an extremely remote area of Mauritania and is not very accessible. The structure is ringed on the north by mountains and is open to the desert facing south. Being the desert, there is much plain and featureless landscape surrounding the Richat structure, but there is a particularly flat rectangle plain that is very close to the structure itself. What do the descriptions say about the topography of Atlantis? The country immediately surrounding the city of Atlantis was a level plain, itself surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. The mountains of the island of Atlantis were celebrated for number and size and beauty. This part of the island looked south and was sheltered from the north. Atlantis was also said to be accessible by sea from the south. When you look at the photos of the now dry Richat structure, you can clearly see what looks like an ancient water access to the structure itself. In an interesting turn of events, the groundwater in the entire area is saltwater. It is a funny distinction considering that this area sits at over 1,000 feet above sea level. In fact, even whale skeletons have been discovered in the area, which clearly proves this region was once part of the sea. The very center of the Richat structure, oddly enough, has a spring of fresh water that comes up to the surface. Everywhere else in the area, you need to dig 400 feet to get access to fresh water. The city of Atlantis was said to have been blessed with a freshwater spring that arose from the center of the city at the behest of the god Poseidon. As described by Plato, a well near the central Acropolis provided the city with fresh water. The god Poseidon found no difficulty in making special arrangements for the center island, bringing up 2 springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water, the other of cold. As the descriptions continue to line up with the physical realities on the ground at the Richat structure, it becomes less and less plausible that this is anything other than the location of Atlantis. For descriptions written 2,500 years ago to so perfectly match a natural formation in the middle of one of the most remote regions in the entire world is hard to believe as a coincidence, to say the least. Interesting fossils and bones can be found in the desert from time to time. The remains of elephants have been found near the area of the Richat structure, and there has been artwork depicting elephants on cave drawings in the surrounding areas. This is not a very surprising finding, considering the Sahara used to be lush, fertile land as little as 5,000 years ago. There would have been an abundance of animal and plant life in the area, including elephants and other large mammals. The surprising connection with the elephants has to do with Plato's descriptions of Atlantis. There were a great number of elephants on the islands. The statement is one of the many that distinguishes the Richat structure from many other theorized locations for Atlantis. In this location, it makes logical and historical sense that there would be elephants on the island due to their proximity to them. The Richat structure, like any desert, is full of sand and stones. However, there is a disproportionately large number of white, red, and black stones in the area. Another notable characteristic of the local geography is that Mauritania is a large producer of gold and other precious metals. How do these facts line up with the descriptions of Atlantis? There was an abundance of metals, copper, and gold. The stone which they quarried was white, another black, and a third red. The main city was constructed with white, red, and black stone. The descriptions left by Plato over 2,500 years ago match the Richat structure so precisely, and in so many unique and interesting ways, it would be hard to dismiss the strong possibility that they are one and the same. The physical evidence may point to the conclusion that they are the same physical location, but are there other types of evidence that connect the Richat structure to the lost island of Atlantis? If it is true that such a powerful and sophisticated society existed, what happened that would wipe it off of the face of the earth? According to Plato, Atlantis was destroyed because the gods became angry with the people of Atlantis. They had become greedy, petty, and morally bankrupt, and the gods had had enough. Because they had lost their way and turned to immoral pursuits, the gods sent fire and earthquakes that caused the island to sink into the sea. As described by Plato, in a single day and night of misfortune, the islands of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. Atlantis is part of the Atlantic that is no longer accessible by ship. This means that the entire island, the entire city, was wiped away in one evening and swallowed by the sea. As we have seen with the myth of Tiaminamu, islands can indeed be sunk in one evening by natural causes. To completely sink an island and devastate it so completely that it is practically erased from the collective memory of mankind would take a natural disaster of epic proportions. Remember, the story that was passed down said that the gods themselves sent earthquakes and fires to destroy Atlantis. Is there evidence of a disaster of this magnitude in the historical record? To accurately determine if there was an event that could be attributed to the cause of the destruction of Atlantis, the date of its reported demise is important. As discussed earlier, Solon lived 2,600 years ago, and at the time he was told of Atlantis, the records of the Egyptians claimed it happened 9,000 years before that. That places the destruction of Atlantis approximately 11,600 years ago. What did the planet look like 11,600 years ago? Was this a turbulent time for our ancestors? Traditional historians would say this was around the time that hunter-gatherers were slowly starting to settle and begin farming the land. Did anything else happen around this time? The Younger Dryas, the turbulent period at the end of the last ice age, ended 11,600 years ago. The end of the last ice age was unusual in many ways. The warming was extremely rapid, up to 10 degrees Celsius in a matter of mere decades. Sea levels rose drastically in a very short time. There was a mass extinction in North America where 35 species of large mammals died off, along with the Clovis culture of Native Americans and many of the fauna of the time. There are many suggestions as to what caused these unusual and turbulent events, the most likely of which is that there was a large asteroid impact in the northern hemisphere, causing massive ice water melting, large-scale fires, and a shockwave that could be felt around the world. There is evidence to suggest that a large asteroid or meteor impacted the Earth near Greenland around this time. The effects of such an impact would immediately be felt worldwide. It would send a tidal wave hurtling across the Atlantic as ice sheets would evaporate and spew superheated steam into the atmosphere. As meltwater flowed into the ocean, it would drastically disrupt the ocean currents by introducing unfathomable amounts of fresh water to their current flows. The climate would immediately be affected by the impact, and that effect would last for decades to come. This is what science suggests, that meltwater changed the ocean cycles, which then led to a period of global warming, the likes of which hadn't been seen before. The end of the last great ice age was upon the Earth. One night of earthquakes and fire to drive Atlantis into the sea. Could an asteroid impact from so far away have been the end of the island of Atlantis? Is there evidence that points to this conclusion? When looking at the location of the Richat structure from space, the landscape spreading towards the Atlantic Ocean does indeed look like it has been washed over by some type of giant wave. The striations in the landscape are similar to the type of sediment left in the dirt after a large flood. The amount of water that an asteroid impact would displace through the shock wave alone is hard to fathom. Theoretically, the tidal wave that reached the shores of Africa would be immense. If the landscape surrounding the Richat structure tells a story, it is that of a sudden flood that washed over the land. It could also be that the very structure of the Richat went through another volcanic shift, causing the entire island structure to fall into the ocean. Could this cataclysm be what the ancients described as the anger of the gods? The timeline of the Younger Dryas impact theory and the date of the destruction of Atlantis align perfectly. The landscape around the area suggests that there was a dramatic flood that swept the land. Could the impact of an asteroid have sent a shock wave that caused an earthquake, which was then followed by a tidal wave that decimated the city? It seems possible, considering the circumstances. If the Younger Dryas impact was strong enough to drastically alter the climate of the Earth and cause mass extinctions on the North American continent, it seems plausible that it could have destroyed a city like Atlantis. So far, the descriptions of Atlantis provided by Plato matched the topography of the area. The timeline of its destruction lines up with a global cataclysm that could account for the destruction of an entire island. Is there any other evidence that suggests Atlantis was located in the Richat structure, or that it was destroyed by a global cataclysm? Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple in the world, was built over 12,000 years ago in Turkey. Its date of construction is important to note because, before its discovery, most scientists firmly believed construction of this type wasn't done by humans until millennia later. If the scientists were so wrong about the dates of these types of construction, what else could they get wrong? This temple was not only built 12,000 years ago, but it appears as if it was buried on purpose. Why would anyone want to do that? If the locals who built the temple saw the drastic changes that were happening all around them as a result of a large asteroid impact, they may have buried it to protect it. That way, they could return to uncover their temple once it was safe. If a city like Atlantis, which had such a big stature and power, once existed, then surely there would be some type of documentation to corroborate that. As previously discussed, a global cataclysm and the passage of thousands of years could easily wipe away any reference of any city or empire. However, if there were any references to such a place, it would go a long way to reinforcing the theory that it existed. In fact, there is a reference to Atlantis outside of the Critias and Timaeus. Herodotus, who lived between 484 and 425 BC, and is commonly referred to as the father of history, had gathered extensive historical and geographical knowledge of all civilizations known to the Greeks. This information was later used for the construction of a detailed map showing parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. On this map, not only do we see Atlantis, but we can see that it's placed directly over modern-day Mauritania. Large maps are constructed with the use of older, accurate maps stitched together to form a picture of all of the surrounding land. The map that was created from the historical account of Herodotus was said to be the most accurate map of its time. What makes this even more relevant is that Herodotus was given the title of Father of History because he was the first to rigorously investigate the accounts of an event, such as the Greco-Persian Wars he detailed in histories, and verifying them through other means and the accounts of other people. He was known for being systematic and extremely thorough. Would a man who is known for the rigor in which he investigates the truth of a subject talk about a fictional city in the most detailed historical work of its time? Not likely. The people that inhabited what is now known as Mauritania have a long and storied history, one of which is particularly relevant to the history of Atlantis. The first king of Atlantis was named Atlas, who was said to be the son of Poseidon. What was the first king of Mauritania named? The legendary Atlas, of course. This coincidence doesn't prove that these were the same people or even related. It is simply another piece of evidence that points to the possibility that Atlantis did exist on the edge of what is now Mauritania. I remind you of what Plato stated. The names of these first inhabitants have been preserved, but their deeds have perished on account of the catastrophes that befell those who succeeded them and the long passage of time intervening. Those of their race who survived these successive destructions were, as I said before, left as an illiterate mountain people who had only heard the tradition of the names of the rulers of their country, and beyond these only little of their deeds. Now, they were pleased to give their descendants the names of these rulers, even though they were unaware of their ancestors' virtues and institutions, except for some dim legends concerning each of them. Then, for many generations, these survivors and their children lived in distress for their survival and gave thought to their needs. They spoke only of supplying these needs and had no interest in the events of the distant past. With all of the evidence laid out, the case for the Richat structure as the original place for Atlantis is very strong. The topography, the size, the time frame of its destruction, the shape of the structure, the groundwater, and other corroborating evidence make the most compelling case for Atlantis so far. The men who shared the story of Atlantis were known to be honorable. This is how Plato told it. This tale about Atlantis, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested to by Solon, who was the wisest of the 7 sages. There has yet to be another location that fits the description better than the Richat structure. Due to its extremely remote location, the Richat structure has never even been excavated for the purposes of archaeology, in any way. The evidence to prove the existence of Atlantis could be out there at this moment. While there cannot be any conclusive claims about the location of Atlantis, all signs point to the Richat structure, the so-called Eye of the Sahara. Perhaps, as more evidence of humanity's past comes to light, we will be able to remember our collective history and look at the tale of Atlantis not as a myth, but as a window into our past and our potential for the future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. And if you're new, hit subscribe and the bell next to it for future notifications.